It all began with a forgotten tapestry and a note signed by a stranger. He knew who she was, what she felt, and even what she was trying to forget. The attraction was immediate, but what bound them together went back much further. If you love stories of love and romance, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. Eleanor Vance, a 38-year-old restorer of religious art, had found in the meticulous craft of restoration a refuge for her fractured soul. In her studio, housed in a colonial manor in Savannah, Georgia, she carefully reconstructed statues of saints, canvases darkened by time, and antique oratories. For Eleanor, bringing life back to these works was more than a profession. It was a silent, safe way to deal with her own past, marked by a wound that had never healed. The inexplicable disappearance of her mother, Marion Vance, also a restorer, during a secretive job at a historic plantation deep in the South Carolina countryside, when Eleanor was only 7. Eleanor's studio was well known in the tight-knit circles of collectors and historical preservation institutions. Her meticulous, almost obsessive work had become her signature. She avoided the spotlight exhibitions and events. She preferred the silence of Baroque churches, of chapels hidden in the Appalachian foothills, where hands had carved figures of faith from wood and stone centuries ago. It was in the solitude of these ancestral buildings that Eleanor felt at home, where she had built her career and, simultaneously, an emotional armor that prevented her from touching the wounds of the past. That October morning, when the chill of the mountains found its way through the cracks of the studio's centuries-old windows, Eleanor received an unusual piece of mail. A thick brown envelope sealed with red wax. Inside, a handwritten letter on cotton paper, with elegant calligraphy done with a fountain pen. The content made her hold her breath. Dear Miss Eleanor Vance, allow me to introduce myself. I am Alistair Finch, owner of Blackwood Manor, located in the South Carolina Low Country. Recently, during renovations of the old plantation chapel, we found a piece we believe to be of inestimable historical and spiritual value, a tapestry from the American colonial period which, according to my family's documents, was brought from England in the 18th century. The piece is in a delicate condition and requires restoration work that only someone with your sensitivity and technical knowledge could perform. I offer you not only a substantial fee for your work, but also accommodation at the manor for the period necessary for the restoration. The tapestry can only be seen in person. It will only be revealed to you, Eleanor. In some way it already knows you. The letter was finished with an elaborate signature and a phone number. Eleanor immediately researched the name Alistair Finch. She discovered he was a former tech magnate who had founded one of the country's largest digital security firms before mysteriously withdrawing from the corporate world 8 years ago, following the strange disappearance of his wife, Louisa Finch. The case had been front-page news but was never solved. Since then, Alistair had lived as a recluse on his historic plantation, one of the oldest from the cotton era in the American South. Eleanor didn't understand why her name was specifically chosen for the job, nor did she comprehend the strange final sentence of the letter. But something in the correspondence awakened a dormant unease, an intimate, inexplicable recognition. As if this proposal were in some way a call she had been waiting for decades. 3 days later, Eleanor was driving her car down the dirt road that led to Blackwood Manor. The landscape of the Low Country opened up into gentle hills, with green pastures and patches of remnant coastal forest. The road snaked until it revealed in the distance the imposing manor, a complex of 19th-century buildings with a 2-story main house painted ochre yellow, with blue windows, wide verandas supported by dark wooden columns, and a chapel with a small bell tower in the center of the grounds. As the car advanced along the avenue of royal palms, Eleanor felt an inexplicable shiver. The property was stunning, but it carried an aura of melancholy. The windows of the main house seemed like watchful eyes. The gardens, though well-tended, had something wild about them, as if nature were always on the verge of reclaiming this human space. A middle-aged caretaker, introducing himself as Samuel, greeted her in the cobblestone courtyard. "The master is in the library, ma'am. He asked me to take you there directly upon your arrival." The man carried Eleanor's bags with an impassive expression, but his eyes revealed curiosity and perhaps a hint of apprehension. The library occupied the entire west wing of the second floor. It was a vast room with floor-to-ceiling rosewood shelves filled with ancient volumes. Large windows allowed the afternoon light to stream in, creating golden patterns on the dark wood floor. In the center, a work table was covered with maps and documents. And with his back to the door, observing the landscape through the window, stood a tall man with short-cut grey hair. Eleanor Vance. He turned slowly. It wasn't a question, but a statement. His voice was deep with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor." Alistair Finch was a man of intimidating presence. He must have been around 50, but his grey eyes carried a weight that seemed to transcend chronological time. His angular face with deep lines around his lips suggested more suffering than age. He was dressed in simple elegance, dark linen trousers, a white cotton shirt, no tie. He didn't smile as he extended his hand in greeting, but his gaze fixed on Eleanor with a disconcerting intensity. "Mr. Finch, I presume?" Eleanor replied, holding his gaze. "I appreciate the invitation, though I still don't quite understand the reason for my selection for this work. Call me Alistair, please." He gestured for her to sit in a leather armchair near the window. "As for your selection, let's say it was a meeting of needs. Your restoration work on St. John's Cathedral in Charleston came to my attention. The delicacy with which you treated the details of the ceiling painting, the sensitivity to preserve the artist's original intent while renewing the work. That is exactly what the tapestry needs." There was something in the way he spoke, a restraint as if he measured every word, that made Eleanor uncomfortable. And there was something else more disturbing, the feeling that he already knew her, that he knew more about her than he was revealing. "Is the tapestry in the chapel?" she asked, trying to steer the conversation to professional ground. "No?" Alistair walked to a bookshelf and removed a book, revealing a small bronze key behind it. "The tapestry is kept in a special room, a place I built specifically for it, with humidity and temperature control. Would you like to see it now?" Eleanor nodded, feeling an inexplicable lump in her throat. She followed Alistair through the corridors of the main house to a door at the end of the east hall. The key turned with difficulty in the old lock. Inside, an antechamber with soft lighting led to another door, this one sealed with a dark leather cloth, hand-stitched with thick thread. Eleanor noticed darkened stains on the fabric. It could be just time or blood. "The tapestry has been protected by this covering since I found it 10 years ago, during the renovation of the house's cellar," Alistair explained. "I've never allowed anyone to examine it." "Until today. Why the secrecy?" Eleanor asked, approaching the leather covering. "A historical piece like this could be in a museum, studied by historians. Some things do not belong in the public domain, Eleanor." Alistair's voice took on an unexpected gravity. "Some stories need to be understood before they are shared, and some wounds need to heal before they are exposed." He handed Eleanor a pair of white cotton gloves. "When you're ready, open the covering. I'll be in the library. Dinner will be served at 8. Alone with the mysterious piece, Eleanor felt a strange hesitation. In over 20 years of her career, she had never experienced such apprehension before starting a job. Slowly, she put on the gloves and touched the fabric covering the tapestry. A strange tingling sensation ran up her arms, like a subtle electric current. She took a deep breath and began to carefully open the stitches of the covering. The first sight of the tapestry took her breath away. It was a piece approximately 6 by 10 feet, made with weaving techniques that blended European and Native American traditions, something extremely rare. The edges showed significant deterioration, but the center still retained surprisingly vivid colors for such an old piece: deep reds, cobalt blues, aged golds. The central image showed a woman in attire that seemed a mixture of 18th century English garments and indigenous adornments. She stood with her back to the viewer, but her face was visible reflected in a mirror she held, and the face was looking back over her shoulder. Behind her, partially hidden by stylized vegetation resembling the coastal forest, a child watched the scene with eyes that seemed fixed directly on Eleanor. There was something disturbingly familiar about those faces, something that provoked a dizzying sense of recognition in Eleanor, as if she were looking at a reflection distorted by time. Her hands trembled as she touched the tapestry's surface, feeling the ancient threads beneath her gloved fingers. "This is too much for me," she murmured to herself. referring not only to the technical challenge the piece represented, but to the overwhelming feeling that she was facing something that transcended a simple restoration job, something that seemed connected in an inexplicable way to her own past. That evening, during dinner served in the enormous dining room of the main house, a room where the light from a crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows on the dark wood table, Eleanor tried to keep the conversation on professional ground. She questioned Alistair about the tapestry's provenance, the conditions in which it was found, the known history of the piece. The answers came measured, precise, but always leaving gaps that intrigued her even more. "I believe the tapestry was brought from England around 1760, during the period when this plantation belonged to the Beaumont family," Alistair explained, pouring himself red wine into a cut crystal glass. "But there are indications that it was modified here in America, possibly by indigenous or mixed-race hands, which makes it even more unique. And how did it come into your possession?" "The plantation has been in my family for 5 generations, bought by the Finches at the end of the cotton era when many planters went bankrupt." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "As for the tapestry specifically, it was found in a secret compartment in the cellar during a structural restoration of the house. It was protected by the same leather covering you saw today." Eleanor sensed there was something unsaid in that explanation, a deliberate omission. "And why did you decide to restore it now after 10 years? Alistair's gaze fixed on her with that unsettling intensity. "Because now I have found the right person for the job." After dinner, Alistair invited Eleanor for coffee on the veranda. Night had fallen completely over the valley, revealing a starry sky of impressive beauty. The air was cool, laden with the scent of the jasmine growing around the house. They talked about art, about restoration techniques, about the history of the Low Country, but Eleanor felt there was a parallel conversation happening, something in the subtext, in the glances, in the pauses. "Your mother was also a restorer, wasn't she?" The question came when silence had already settled between them, as if Alistair had deliberately waited for the moment Eleanor would lower her guard. She felt her body stiffen. "Yes, Marian Vance, one of the pioneers in the restoration of religious art in this country." She hesitated. "She disappeared during a job in 1992. I was 7. "I know." Alistair's reply was almost a whisper. "I knew your mother, Eleanor." The world seemed to freeze around her. "What? How? When?" "She worked here, on the plantation." Alistair stood up, walking to the veranda's balustrade. With his back to Eleanor, he continued, "She was the one who originally found the tapestry. She was the one who began the restoration work." Eleanor felt the blood run cold in her veins. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her coffee cup, which shattered on the wooden floor of the veranda. "Are you telling me my mother was here? That she disappeared from here?" Alistair turned slowly. His face was cloaked in shadows, but Eleanor could feel the weight of his gaze. "I'm telling you, Eleanor, that your mother started a job that only you can finish, a job that goes beyond the restoration of a simple historical piece. A job that perhaps can heal wounds we've both carried for decades." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The room assigned to her was spacious, with an antique 4-poster bed, period furniture, and a window overlooking the gardens. But she felt suffocated, as if the walls held secrets that whispered in the darkness. The revelation that her mother had been here, on this very plantation, possibly working on the same tapestry, was too disturbing to process. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep. She put on a robe over her nightgown and stepped out into the silent hallway. The house was submerged in shadows, with only a few security lamps casting circles of yellowish light on the floor. With no set destination, she let her intuition guide her, descending the main staircase to the first floor. Her steps led her to the library. The door was ajar and a soft light emanated from within. Eleanor hesitated, but something compelled her to enter. Alistair was there, sitting in an armchair near the window, an old book open on his lap. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, closing the book. "How could I? After what you told me?" Eleanor approached, her voice a mixture of anguish and restrained anger. "Why didn't you tell me this in the letter? Why didn't you mention my mother from the beginning? Would you have come if I had?" Alistair's gaze was intense, almost feverish in the lamplight. "Or would you have run away?" as you have from every other clue about her disappearance over the years. The accusation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. It was true. After years of fruitless searching in her adolescence, she had in a way given up on finding the truth. She had hidden in her work, in her solitary routine, distancing herself from anything that could reopen that wound. "What exactly do you know about her disappearance?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Alistair gestured to the armchair opposite his. When Eleanor sat, he opened the book again, pulling an old photograph from between its pages. He handed it to her without a word. The photo, yellowed with age, showed a young woman sitting at a workbench, leaning over what appeared to be the same tapestry Eleanor had seen earlier. The woman was Marion Vance, her mother, about 20 years younger than in her last memories. And in the background, partially visible in the shadows, was a man Eleanor recognized immediately, Alistair Finch, exactly as he was now, with no sign that 30 years had passed. "This isn't possible," Eleanor whispered, feeling the blood drain from her face. "This photo, when was it taken?" "1992, 3 weeks before your mother disappeared. But you look exactly the same. As if you haven't aged a day." The silence that followed was suffocating. Alistair stood up, walking to the bookshelf. He took out a volume bound in red leather and opened it, revealing handwritten pages in an ancient script. "There are things about this plantation, about the tapestry, about your mother and about me that defy conventional explanations." "Eleanor," his voice had taken on a grave, almost ritualistic tone, "and there are things about yourself that you do not know. Things your mother wanted to protect you from discovering." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor stood, her legs trembling. "What does my mother have to do with all of this? What happened to her?" "That is something only the tapestry can fully answer." Alistair closed the book with a decisive movement. "And that is why you must restore it. Not just for the worn threads or the faded colors, but to reveal the full image it hides. The truth your mother began to uncover, and which may have been the cause of her disappearance." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. She leaned on the table to keep from falling. "Are you saying my mother? That she discovered something dangerous during the restoration? Something related to you?" Alistair's gaze met hers, and in it was a bewildering mix of guilt, pain, and something else, a feeling Eleanor couldn't name, but that made her shudder. "I'm saying your mother and I shared a secret that now connects me to you." He approached, stopping just a step away. "And I'm saying, Eleanor, that if you want to find the truth about her, about me, about yourself, you will have to dive into waters far deeper and darker than you ever imagined." The air between them seemed electrified. Eleanor could feel his breath, the warmth emanating from his body. There was something magnetic about this man, something that both drew her in and repelled her. A part of her wanted to flee immediately, to leave this plantation and its disturbing mysteries behind. But another part, the part that had carried the void of her mother's disappearance for 3 decades, knew she could not turn her back on this opportunity. Even if it meant facing painful truths, even if it meant putting herself in danger. "I'll restore the tapestry," she said finally, her voice finding a firmness she didn't know she possessed. "I will find out what happened to my mother. And then, Alistair Finch, you will tell me exactly who or what you really are." Dawn found Eleanor already back in the room where the tapestry was kept. With basic restoration equipment she had brought with her, and others provided by Alistair, she began the meticulous work of assessing the piece. She photographed every inch, documented damage, tested the strength of the threads, identified the original materials. As she worked, her mind reeled with questions. Who was Alistair Finch really? How could he be in the 1992 photograph without having aged? What secret did the tapestry hold? And how did it connect to her mother's disappearance? And more disturbingly, what truths about herself did she not know, as Alistair had insinuated? Throughout the day she worked in silence, interrupted only by the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, who brought her light meals and tea. Alistair did not appear. Only a note delivered with her lunch. The truth reveals itself slowly, like layers of paint under the light. Be patient, and be careful what you awaken. As the work progressed, Eleanor began to notice unsettling details in the tapestry. Under certain angles of light, there seemed to be a second image hidden beneath the first, as if the piece had been reworked over an older tapestry. In some spots, as she carefully removed the accumulated dirt. Symbols emerged that did not belong to any artistic tradition she knew, complex geometric designs that seemed to pulse under her gaze. And there was the face of the woman in the mirror. The more she cleaned it, the more familiar it became, a disturbing resemblance to her own mother. As night fell, exhausted physically and emotionally, Eleanor put away her tools and covered the tapestry with a protective cloth. She needed air, space to think. She went out into the gardens, now bathed in the silvery light of the full moon rising in the sky. That's when she saw him. Alistair was standing by an old tree in the garden, motionless as a statue watching the moon. There was something ritualistic in his posture. Eleanor approached silently until a twig snapped under her feet, betraying her presence. Alistair turned slowly. His face, illuminated by the moon, seemed transformed, younger, more intense. His eyes shone in a way that did not seem natural. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice strangely melodic in the night stillness. The image beneath the image, the reflection in the mirror. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. Who is the woman in the tapestry? An ancestor, a seer, a woman who knew secrets that should not be known. Alistair took a step toward her. A woman who, like your mother, like you, had the gift. What gift? The gift of seeing beyond the veil, of perceiving the seams of time. Another step. They were now close enough for Eleanor to smell his scent, an aroma of wood, herbs, and something else, something ancient and indefinable. The gift that allows one to restore not just objects, but memories, lives, destinies. I don't know what you're talking about. Eleanor tried to step back, but her body seemed not to obey. There was something hypnotic in his voice, in the way the moon reflected in his eyes. Yes, you do. You've always known. Alistair raised a hand, almost touching Eleanor's face, but stopping millimeters from her skin. It's why you chose restoration as your craft. It's why you can see what others don't in the works you restore. It's why your mother tried to keep you from your true nature, to protect you. A sudden wind rustled the leaves of the tree above them. The moonlight created dancing patterns on Alistair's face, and for an instant, a brief, terrifying instant, Eleanor had the impression of seeing another face superimposed on his. An older, wilder face. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone who has waited for you." Alistair finally touched her face, a touch as light as the brush of a feather. "Someone who needs you to break a cycle that has gone on for far too long." At his touch, something awakened within Eleanor. A warm current ran through her body, and fragmented images flashed in her mind. Her mother before the tapestry, a pattern of light forming around her, a silent scream, and then darkness, and in the midst of the darkness a face, Alistair's face, watching across the centuries. "What did you do to my mother?" she asked, pulling away sharply, the spell broken by the sudden flash of fear. Alistair's face contorted in an expression of genuine pain. "I did nothing to her, Eleanor. I tried to prevent what happened. I tried to warn her of the danger, but she went too far in the restoration, awakened something that should have remained dormant." "What? What did she awaken?" Alistair looked toward the house, toward the window of the room where the tapestry waited. The tapestry is not just a work of art, it is a portal, a living record of knowledge that dates back to times before colonization. Your mother discovered this, and when the portal opened, he didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Eleanor felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Are you saying she was taken? Where to?" "To a place between places. A time between times." Alistair looked back at her, and now there was an urgency in his eyes. "And that is why I need you, Eleanor. Because only you with the same gift can complete the work she started, can find the way to her, and can bring us both back. Both of us." Eleanor frowned, confused. "I am trapped too, Eleanor. I am here but not here. I am a reflection, a shadow of the man I was." He held his hand up to the moonlight, and for a moment it seemed translucent, ethereal. "I bound myself voluntarily to this plane to wait for you, to guide you. But my time is running out." Eleanor felt the world spin around her. It was too much to process, too much to believe. Part of her still suspected this was all an elaborate manipulation, a cruel game for some obscure purpose. But another part, the part that had always felt there was something more beyond the visible world, the part that found in restorations a connection to something transcendent, recognized a truth in his words. "I need to think," she said finally, taking another step back. "I need to process all this. We don't have much time, Eleanor." Alistair's voice now had a note of pleading. "The portal can only be reopened during the full moon, this moon, and even then only if the tapestry is completely restored." 3 days, she replied, surprised by her own calmness. "Give me 3 days to restore the tapestry, to understand what I'm doing, and then I will decide if I believe you, if I help you." For a moment it seemed he would protest, but then slowly he nodded. 3 days, until the full moon reaches its peak. After that what? After that the veil will close again. For how long, I cannot say. Alistair looked up at the starry sky, his profile silhouetted against the silvery light. Perhaps for another lifetime, perhaps forever. Eleanor returned to her room, her mind in a whirlwind. She knew she wouldn't be able to sleep, but she had to at least try to order her thoughts. She lay on the bed, still dressed, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. Could she believe this fantastic story? In portals through time, in mystical gifts, in men trapped between dimensions? It seemed insane. And yet, there was the tapestry. There was the photograph. There was her mother's unexplained disappearance. And there was that feeling she had always had during her restoration work, that she was touching something beyond the fabric, the paint, the wood. That she was somehow restoring time itself. She closed her eyes and a long-buried memory surfaced, her mother leaning over an old canvas, whispering as she worked. "You see, Ellie, when we remove the layers of time, we're not just cleaning paint. We're freeing memories. We're allowing the past to breathe again." And then a strange, almost frightened look when she realized her daughter was watching. But some memories must remain dormant. Some doors must remain closed. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, a shiver running through her. It was the first time in decades she had remembered those words. The first time she realized that perhaps her mother had tried to warn her about something, protect her from something, or perhaps guide her silently to this moment, to this choice. She stood up with sudden resolution. If there was a chance, however remote, of finding out what happened to her mother, of perhaps incredibly finding her again, she could not turn her back on it. She would return to the tapestry the next morning. And this time, not just as a restorer, but as someone searching for a path through the very fabric of reality. A path back to the past. A path home. The morning light seeped through the manor's windows as Eleanor returned to the room where the tapestry awaited. With renewed determination and slightly trembling hands, she uncovered the piece and observed it in the morning clarity. In this new light, previously unnoticed details revealed themselves, golden threads that seemed to capture and reflect the sun, creating luminous patterns that danced on the surface, colors that shifted subtly with the angle of observation. And most disturbingly, the face reflected in the mirror now undeniably resembled her mother's. Eleanor methodically arranged her tools. A handheld microscope, brushes of various sizes, specific solvents, fine needles, replacement threads carefully dyed to match the originals. But before beginning the technical process, she did something she had never done before. She closed her eyes and touched the tapestry with her bare palms, trying to feel beyond the material. An immediate warmth rose up her arms, followed by a tingling that spread throughout her body. Fragmented images flashed in her mind, hands weaving by candlelight, a woman crying as she embroidered, her mother years ago in this very room, touching the tapestry in the same way. And for a fleeting instant, Alistair's face, not as the man she had met the night before, but as something older, more primal, his eyes glowing with an inner light that did not seem human. Eleanor pulled her hands away abruptly, breathless. This was not just imagination or suggestion. It was memory, memory that did not belong to her, but was somehow interwoven into the very threads of the piece. "You felt it, didn't you?" Alistair's voice came from the doorway, startling her. He stood there watching her with his characteristic intensity, wearing simple dark linen clothes that contrasted with his pallor. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What is happening to me?" "It is the awakening." Alistair entered the room slowly, as if measuring each step. The recognition. Your gift was dormant, protected by layers of denial and forgetfulness, but the tapestry is calling it back. It is reminding your body of what your mind has forgotten. Eleanor looked at her own hands, which were still tingling. These memories I saw, they're not mine. No, they are not. Alistair approached the tapestry, maintaining a cautious distance. They are memories of the piece itself, of who wove it, of who touched it over the centuries. Of your mother. How is that possible? The tapestry was not made with just threads, Eleanor. It was made with intention, with sacrifice. His gaze fixed on the central image, on the woman with the mirror. It was created as a record. A map, a path to where? To the other side of the mirror. Alistair moved to a nearby bookshelf, from which he took an old book bound in dark leather. Have you heard of the Order of the Broken Mirror? Eleanor frowned. A medieval European sect, if I recall correctly. There were rumors of occult practices, of attempts to manipulate time or communicate with other dimensions. But that's considered pseudoscience, a myth. The order existed, and it still exists. Alistair opened the book, revealing parchment pages covered with complex symbols and diagrams, and it was not European in origin. It was born here on this continent, long before the arrival of the English. The colonizers merely gave a European name to something that already existed among the native peoples, the knowledge that the reality we perceive is just one side of a mirror, and that under certain conditions it is possible to cross to the other side. Eleanor felt a chill. Part of her wanted to reject it all as delusion, but another part, the part that had just experienced impossible memories, recognized a truth in his words. And you? What is your role in all this? The silence that followed was tense, heavy. Finally, Alistair closed the book with a gentle motion. I am a guardian, or I was. His eyes met hers, and in them was an ancient sadness. I was assigned to protect this portal, this tapestry, to ensure no one used it without understanding the consequences. I failed once, centuries ago, when the tapestry was stolen and taken to Europe. And I failed again when your mother discovered its secrets before I could guide her properly. Are you saying my mother crossed over? To where? To a place outside of time as we know it. A place where past, present, and future coexist. Alistair took a step toward her, and Eleanor noticed that in the direct light, there was something ethereal about his figure, as if he weren't entirely there. When she realized what was happening, she tried to return. I tried to help her, but the portal is unstable. It needs someone on both sides to stabilize it. So you, sacrificed yourself? So I split myself. Part of me went with her, to keep her safe on the other side. Part of me remained here to wait for the only person who could reopen the portal correctly. Me, Eleanor whispered, the understanding dawning on her like a weight. You, the daughter of a crosser, heir to the gift, the only one who could restore the tapestry, not just physically but spiritually, the only one who could complete the cycle. Eleanor backed away, walking to the window. Outside, the day progressed, bright and ordinary. Birds sang in the gardens. An elderly gardener trimmed bushes in the distance. The world continued its routine, oblivious to the fact that in that room the very foundations of reality were being questioned. How do I know this isn't all an elaborate lie? A manipulation for what exactly? She turned to him, crossing her arms protectively. What do you gain from this? Release, reunification. Alistair remained where he was, giving her the space she clearly needed. I cannot continue like this, divided for much longer. And your mother. Your mother has been trapped for 30 years in a place where time doesn't flow as it does here. To her it may have been only days. Or centuries. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. The possibility that her mother still existed somewhere, in some form, that she could see her again, was too powerful to ignore. But equally strong was her instinct for caution. Even if I believe you, she said finally, I don't know how to do what you're asking. I don't know how to reopen a portal or use this supposed gift. Yes, you do. It's in your blood, in your hands. Alistair pointed to the tapestry. Start by doing what you know how to do. Restore, clean, rebuild. And as you work, allow yourself to feel beyond the technique. Allow yourself to remember. Eleanor looked at the tapestry, at the hands of the woman holding the mirror, at the child watching from the shadows. A part of her, the professional restorer, the skeptic, the woman who had built emotional walls so high that even she could no longer climb them, wanted to flee this mansion, this man, this fantastic story. But another part, the girl who had lost her mother, The woman, who had always felt there was something more to her restoration work than mere technique, recognized a truth in his words. A truth that resonated somewhere deep within her being. 3 days, she repeated, turning back to her tools. I will restore the tapestry in 3 days. And then we'll see. Alistair nodded gravely. 3 days, until the full moon reaches its peak. For the next 2 days, Eleanor immersed herself in the restoration work with an intensity that surprised even her. She slept little, ate even less. Her concentration was absolute, her movements precise, methodical. With every stitch she redid, every stain she removed, every color she revitalized, she sought not just technical perfection, but also that deeper connection, that feeling beyond the material she had briefly experienced. Alistair rarely appeared in the room during the day. He had meals sent in with Mrs. Gable, sent books and documents that might assist her, but kept his distance, as if he understood she needed this space to process everything that was happening. At night, however, they would meet in the library or on the veranda. They talked for hours, he recounting stories of the Order of the Broken Mirror, of the plantation's history, of the years he had spent waiting for her. Eleanor questioned, challenged, tried to find contradictions or flaws that could expose this entire narrative as a fraud. But with each conversation, her resistance waned. There was an internal coherence to Alistair's explanations, a depth of knowledge that would be difficult to fabricate. And there was also something in the way he spoke of her mother, with a reverent respect, as if speaking of an equal, a partner, that touched Eleanor deeply. She was extraordinary, you know, Alistair said on the second night, as they watched the stars from the veranda. Not just in her gift, but in her courage. When she realized what the tapestry truly was, she didn't run. She wanted to understand, to explore. She is a scientist of the soul. I always thought of her as just a restorer, Eleanor murmured, recalling fragments of childhood memories. A skilled artisan, perhaps an artist, never as an explorer of other worlds. She was very careful to keep that part of her life separate from you. She wanted to protect you. Alistair turned to her, his profile silhouetted against the night sky. She wanted you to have a choice, not to be dragged into this world unprepared. But here I am, exactly where she didn't want me to be. Or exactly where she knew you would eventually be. His eyes shone in a way that didn't seem entirely natural. Perhaps it wasn't protection. Perhaps it was preparation. On the morning of the 3rd day, Eleanor awoke from a vivid dream. In it, she stood before the fully restored tapestry. The woman in the center no longer looked at the mirror. She looked directly at Eleanor, her eyes alive, pulsating. And in the background, there was no longer a child watching, but a second woman, emerging from the shadows with outstretched hands. The dream stayed with her as she resumed her work, now entering the final phase of restoration. The most severe damage had been repaired, the colors revitalized. Only one section remained, the lower right where the child watched, partially hidden by stylized vegetation. It was in this area that Eleanor found something she hadn't noticed before, a pocket sewn into the fabric of the tapestry itself, carefully hidden among the folds. With cautious fingers, she opened the small compartment. Inside was a metal object, a small circular silver mirror, its back engraved with the same geometric symbols that appeared on the tapestry. It's the key. Alistair's voice startled her. He was standing at the door watching her with an intense expression. He looked paler than in the previous days, almost translucent in the light streaming through the window. The key to what? Eleanor asked, holding the small mirror. To the portal, to the other side. Alistair approached slowly, his steps almost silent on the wooden floor. Your mother found it too. That's how she knew how to cross. Eleanor studied the small object. The silver was tarnished with age, but it still reflected her distorted face. The symbols engraved on the back seemed to shift subtly under her gaze, as if they were alive. And how does it work? The mirror must be placed in the center of the tapestry when the restoration is complete. During the full moon, Alistair stopped a few steps from her, his hands trembling slightly. But there is one more thing you need to know before you proceed. Something in his voice, a note of hesitation, perhaps of guilt, made Eleanor look up from the mirror. What? The crossing has a price. It always has. Alistair looked away for a moment as if gathering courage. For someone to pass to the other side, someone must remain as an anchor. Has a guardian. Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. Are you saying that even if we manage to open the portal, not everyone can come back? I'm saying that guardians are needed on both sides. Your mother is on one side. I am split between the two. He finally met her eyes. For her to return, someone must take her place. The weight of those words fell on Eleanor like an avalanche. And you expect me to... No, the answer was quick, intense. Never, I would never ask that of you. Alistair took a step toward her. I'm telling you because you need to understand the full truth, and because when the portal opens, I will have to make a choice. A choice I have been postponing for decades. What choice? To remain divided, keeping both your mother and you safe, but eventually dissolving completely. Or, he hesitated. Or to reunify myself on the other side, allowing her to return, but leaving this side without a guardian. Eleanor looked at the small mirror in her hand, at the symbols that seemed to pulse, as if they had a heart of their own. The implication was clear. If Alistair reunified on the other side, he would disappear from this world. He would cease to exist here. And if he dissolved completely, she would lose her mother forever. There has to be another way, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Some way to bring everyone back. If there is, I haven't found it in 3 decades of searching. Alistair's voice was gentle, resigned. But perhaps you, with your gift, with your connection to your mother, can find it when the portal opens. Eleanor felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Anger at being dragged into this impossible situation, fear of what might happen when the tapestry was finally restored, hope that she might see her mother again after so many years, and most surprisingly, a sharp pain at the thought that Alistair might disappear from her life, just as he had barely entered it. This last thought caught her by surprise. When exactly had she started to care for him? When had his stories about her mother touched something deep in her heart? When had she realized the infinite loneliness he carried, divided between 2 worlds for 3 decades? Or when, in their nightly conversations, she had seen in him not just a mysterious being, but a man of flesh and blood, carrying an impossible burden for love and duty? I'll finish the restoration today, she said finally, putting the small mirror in her pocket. And tonight, during the full moon, we will do what needs to be done. Alistair nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. I will be ready. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called out to him, Alistair. He stopped, looking over his shoulder. What was she like? My mother. Who was she, really? A sad smile touched his lips. She was light, his light. The kind of person who walks into a room and everything becomes brighter, more alive. Intelligent, stubborn, brave to the point of recklessness. His voice softened. And she loved you more than anything. Every day on the other side, every moment of her existence there, was lived with the hope of one day finding a way back to you. Something warm and painful expanded in Eleanor's chest. Tears she had held back for decades threatened to overflow. Thank you, she whispered. When Alistair left, Eleanor turned back to the tapestry with renewed determination. The final hours of work were the most intense. Every stitch redone, every stain cleaned, every color restored was now more than technique. It was intention, connection, an opening to the gift that was slowly awakening within her. And as she worked, memories began to surface. Not just her own of a childhood with her mother, but memories that couldn't be hers. An indigenous woman weaving by a firelight, singing in a language Eleanor didn't know but somehow understood. English colonizers discovering the tapestry in an abandoned village. The piece being taken across the ocean, studied by members of the Order in Europe. Its return to America centuries later, hidden as contraband. And finally her mother, discovering it in the plantation's cellar, unearthing it like a forgotten treasure. When the last stitch was redone, the last detail restored, Eleanor stepped back to contemplate the completed work. The transformation was extraordinary. The colors vibrated with a life of their own, the once obscure details now clear and precise. And the central image, the woman looking back through the mirror, seemed almost to breathe, her eyes bright, alive, familiar. But there was something more, something that made Eleanor hold her breath. The child in the background, who watched the woman, was no longer a child. As Eleanor looked, the figure seemed to transform, to grow, revealing itself as a second woman emerging from the shadows. A woman whose face was unsettlingly similar to her own. It is ready. Alistair's voice came from the door. He was dressed formally now, in clothes that seemed from another era. A white linen shirt with embroidered details, dark trousers, a brocade vest. In his hands he carried an old book that Eleanor recognized as the one he had consulted days before. "The moon is rising," he continued, approaching to observe the restored tapestry. "We are at the perfect moment." Eleanor felt a tremor run through her body. Part of her still fought against the reality of what they were about to do. Open a portal to another dimension, challenge the very laws of nature. But another part, the part that now recognized the gift in her veins, knew it was real, that it was possible, that it was necessary. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice firmer than she expected. "Place the mirror in the center of the tapestry." Over the image of the embroidered mirror, Alistair opened the book to a marked page, revealing a diagram that matched the symbols engraved on the small silver mirror. "When the moonlight touches the metal directly, recite these words. They are ancient, predating the arrival of the English, but you will know how to pronounce them. Your blood will remember." Eleanor took the mirror from her pocket, observing it in the light of the candles that now illuminated the room. The moon was rising in the sky, visible through the open window, its intense glow casting sharp shadows on the floor. "And you? What will you do?" Alistair closed the book, placing it on a nearby table. "I will be here, keeping this side stable, and when the portal opens," he hesitated, "I will do what is necessary." Eleanor wanted to ask more, to protest, to find another solution, but time was short, and her instinct told her this was the right path. The only path. Carefully she placed the small mirror in the center of the tapestry, exactly over the image of the mirror held by the woman. For a moment nothing happened. Then, slowly, the moon rose high enough for its light to stream directly through the window. Touching the silver metal, the mirror began to glow, not just reflecting the moonlight, but emitting a light of its own, bluish, pulsating. The symbols engraved on its back seemed to move, to dance, as if they were alive. Eleanor glanced at Alistair, who nodded encouragingly. Then she turned her attention to the open book, to the words written in a language she had never studied. Surprisingly, she could understand them, not with her mind, but with something deeper, more primal. She began to recite. The words flowed from her mouth like water, natural, ancient. And as she spoke, something extraordinary happened. The light from the mirror intensified, expanded, first touching the edges of the tapestry and then the entire room. The very threads of the piece seemed to move, to intertwine in new ways, creating patterns that defied three-dimensional logic. And at the center of it all, the image of the woman with the mirror began to transform. Her face, once only similar to Eleanor's mother's, was now unmistakably that of Marian Vance. Her eyes fixed directly on Eleanor, alive, conscious. A wind that came from no window stirred in the room, making the candle flames dance frantically. The air became thick, electric, and before Eleanor's astonished eyes, the surface of the tapestry began to ripple, the depth becoming literal, as if the two-dimensional image were transforming into a corridor, a tunnel that stretched infinitely beyond the fabric. "It's happening," Alistair whispered, his voice distant, as if coming from far away. "The portal is opening." Eleanor wanted to reply, but the words continued to flow from her mouth automatically, as if a part of her knew exactly what to do. The tunnel in the tapestry expanded, deepened, and within it, in the distance, a figure began to materialize, a female silhouette, walking toward her, each step making her more solid, more real. "Mother," Eleanor managed to say, momentarily interrupting the flow of ancient words. The figure stopped as if she had heard. Then she quickened her pace, moving with more urgency through the impossible corridor that had formed in the tapestry's fabric. It was then that Eleanor realized something was wrong with Alistair. He had fallen to his knees, his body shaking violently, and there was something disturbing about his appearance. He was becoming translucent, his edges blurring, as if he were dissolving into the light itself. "Alistair," she exclaimed, cutting off the incantation completely. "Keep going," he gasped. "Don't stop. I'm reunifying. The part of me that was with her is returning, but we can't keep both sides stable for long." Eleanor turned back to the tunnel in the tapestry. Her mother's figure was closer now, her details sharper. It was her, undoubtedly, younger than in her last memories, wearing the same clothes from the day she disappeared, her eyes wide with surprise and hope. "Eleanor." The voice came faintly, distantly, as if through water. "Is that you?" "Mother!" Eleanor cried, instinctively reaching for the portal. "I'm here. We're trying to bring you back." "No!" Alistair's voice was urgent, desperate. "Don't touch the portal before she crosses completely. You could destabilize it." Eleanor reluctantly pulled back, watching in anguish as her mother advanced through the tunnel, each step seeming to cost her immense effort. Behind her, the portal was beginning to pulse irregularly, as if losing energy. "Alistair," Marion called from within the tunnel, her voice clearer now. "You did it. You found my daughter." "I always keep my promises," he replied, still kneeling, his body now almost completely translucent. Eleanor realized what was happening. Alistair was disappearing from this side, reunifying on the other side of the portal. He was sacrificing himself to allow her mother to return. "There has to be another way," she cried, torn between watching her mother approach and Alistair fade away. "There isn't," he answered, his voice now almost inaudible. "This is the price. The balance must be maintained." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. In just a few days, this mysterious man had become important to her in a way she couldn't explain. The thought of losing him, just as she was about to regain her mother, was devastating. Marion was now just a few steps from the tunnel's exit, her figure almost completely material. But the portal was visibly destabilizing, its edges flickering, its light pulsing erratically. "Hurry, Mother!" Eleanor shouted. "The portal is closing." With one last effort, Marion lunged forward, crossing the portal's threshold just as it began to collapse in on itself. She fell into Eleanor's arms, solid, real, alive, younger than her daughter now, but unmistakably her mother. The portal imploded with a sound like shattering glass. The bluish light retracted violently, sucking itself into the small silver mirror, which then fell onto the tapestry with a dull thud. The supernatural wind ceased. The candles stabilized. And Alistair was gone. "No," Eleanor whispered, still holding her mother but looking in despair at the empty space where he had been. "No, no, no. Oh, my child," Marion said, touching Eleanor's face with trembling fingers. "My Eleanor, how you've grown. How beautiful you've become." Eleanor looked at her mother, the woman she had mourned for decades, dreamed of every night during her childhood, whose absence had defined her entire adult life. She should have been exultant, overflowing with joy, and she was, in a way, but there was also a sharp pain, a sense of loss she hadn't expected to feel. "He's gone," she whispered. "To bring you back to me." Marion nodded, her eyes full of a sad wisdom. "That is how it works. The balance. The exchange." She held her daughter's hands, looking into her eyes. Alistair knew what he was doing. He knew from the beginning. That's why he waited so long to find you, to bring you here, to complete the cycle. "But I barely knew him," Eleanor replied, the tears now flowing freely. "And now I'll never see him again." Her mother looked at the tapestry, at the image that, surprisingly, had transformed once more. It now showed not one but two women side by side. And the reflection in the mirror was no longer a face, but a distant, mysterious landscape, a place beyond time, beyond understanding. "Perhaps," Marion said softly, "this is not the end of the story. Perhaps it is just the beginning of another." She picked up the small silver mirror, studying the symbols engraved on its back. "These symbols, they're not just for opening the portal. They are a map, an invitation." Eleanor frowned, wiping her tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean my daughter," Marion replied with an enigmatic smile. "That now that you have awakened your gift, now that you have completed the tapestry's restoration, there is so much more to learn, so much more to discover." She pressed the mirror into Eleanor's hand. "And perhaps with enough time and knowledge, we can find a way to him. A path that does not require sacrifice but choice." Eleanor looked at the small object in her hand, at the symbols she now recognized not just as portals, but as keys to worlds of possibility. And for the first time since arriving at this plantation, she felt something that resembled hope. "Then teach me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Teach me everything you know, everything you learned on the other side." Marion embraced her, and in that hug Eleanor felt decades of absence being filled, healed. But she also felt something more, a nascent determination, a purpose that went beyond reuniting with her mother. And then, she continued, looking at the tapestry that now seemed to observe them like a conscious entity, we will find a way to him. We will bring Alistair back. The full moon shone over the plantation, bathing the gardens, the main house, the room where mother and daughter were reunited after 30 years of separation. And somewhere beyond the veil of time, beyond the fabric of reality, Alistair Finch waited, as he had waited before, as he would wait for as long as it took. Because some stories do not end with a closed portal. Some stories only begin when a cycle is completed. And some restorations go far beyond fabric and paint. They reach the very heart of time, the very fabric of existence. Eleanor Vance, restorer of art, and now heir to an ancestral gift, knew this better than anyone. And as the night wore on, as she held her mother and clutched the small silver mirror like a promise, a plan began to form in her mind. A plan not just to restore what was lost, but to create something entirely new, a path, a future, a possibility that transcended even the ancient laws of the broken mirror. 6 months had passed since that full moon night, when Eleanor Vance found her mother and lost Alistair Finch to the other side of the portal. 6 months of intense learning, of rediscoveries, of grief and hope intertwined like the very threads of the tapestry that had changed their lives forever. Blackwood Manor had been transformed. What was once a place shrouded in mystery and melancholy now pulsed with a renewed energy. The library, formerly Alistair's solitary sanctuary, had become the mother and daughter's center of operations. Piles of ancient books covered the large wooden table. Maps and diagrams lined the walls, and the tapestry, now framed in a special structure, occupied the main wall, silently observing the two women's efforts. Eleanor watched her mother as she worked tirelessly on a complex translation of a manuscript from the Order of the Broken Mirror. Marian Vance looked like a woman in her early 40s at most, though chronologically she should have been over 60. Time on the other side of the portal had flowed differently. For her, only 8 years had passed, not 30. The reunion with a daughter now older than herself had been just the first of many shocks upon returning to the world she had known. The problem, Marian said, looking up from the manuscript, is that these texts assume knowledge that was lost centuries ago. They refer to rituals and practices as if they were obvious, when to us they are complete enigmas. Eleanor nodded, turning from the window where she had been watching the light rain fall on the gardens. These months had been transformative, not just because of the reunion with her mother, but because of the complete reorientation of her understanding of reality. What she had once considered myths, superstitions, or pseudoscience, she now saw as fragments of an ancestral knowledge that transcended the simplistic categories of modern thought. Maybe we're approaching this the wrong way, she suggested, sitting beside her mother. We're trying to understand with our minds what can perhaps only be understood through the gift. Marian smiled, the smile Eleanor vaguely remembered from her childhood, a mix of pride and challenge. As always, you get straight to the point. That's exactly what Alistair would say. The mention of his name still caused a tightness in Eleanor's chest. In the first few months, she had devoted herself frantically to research, convinced she would find a formula, a ritual, a technique that would allow them to reopen the portal and bring Alistair back without demanding another sacrifice. But as time passed, and the complexities of the Order's knowledge revealed themselves, her determination gave way to a more sober understanding of the difficulties involved. I miss him, she admitted, something she rarely verbalized. It's strange, isn't it? I only knew him for a few days, and yet, time is an illusion, my child. Especially when it comes to connections like the one you two shared. Marian closed the manuscript, looking directly at Eleanor. I believe you knew each other long before those days. Perhaps not in this life, but on some deeper level. Eleanor sighed. This was another transformation, an openness to possibilities she would have once dismissed as fantasy. Past lives, consciousnesses intertwined through time. Destinies that intersected in patterns as complex as the tapestry itself. Ideas that would have once made the skeptical art restorer roll her eyes now seemed plausible, even likely. We need help, she said finally. We can't do this alone. I agree, but who? The modern order exists only as a shadow of its former self. and revealing what we've discovered to conventional academics would be complicated, to say the least. Eleanor stood up, walking to the tapestry. The piece had changed again after the portal closed. It now showed 3 figures, not 2. 2 women side by side, and a third male figure, visible only as a reflection in the mirror held by the central woman, as if Alistair were watching from another plane, through that window of silver and fabric. "There is someone," Eleanor said, an idea slowly forming. "Someone who can help us understand not just the mystical aspects but also the scientific ones of the portal." Marion raised an eyebrow, curious. "Who?" "Dr. Robert Cole, a theoretical physicist specializing in quantum mechanics and parallel universe theories. We worked together on a digital preservation project for artworks a few years ago." Eleanor turned to her mother. "He's always been fascinated by where science meets the mystical. And, more importantly, he's open-minded enough not to immediately dismiss us as crazy." "A scientist," Marion murmured, thoughtful. "Alistair always said that true magic is just science we don't understand yet. Perhaps you're right to seek that bridge." The decision was made that same afternoon. Eleanor called Robert, now a professor at a major university. The conversation was cautious on her part. How do you explain the inexplicable over the phone? But it was enough to pique the scientist's curiosity. He agreed to visit the plantation the following weekend, intrigued by Eleanor's mysterious tone and the mention of a phenomenon that would challenge his boldest theories. During the week that followed, Eleanor and Marion reorganized their findings, preparing a careful presentation that wouldn't immediately scare off their visitor. They decided to start with the more scientific aspects, the unusual composition of the pigments in the tapestry, the anomalous reflective properties of the small silver mirror, the geometric patterns that seem to anticipate modern discoveries in quantum physics. Only if he showed receptiveness to these anomalies would they move on to the more challenging issues, the portal, the temporal displacement, Alistair. When Robert's car finally arrived at the plantation that rainy Friday, Helena felt a mix of anxiety and hope she hadn't experienced since the night she opened the portal. She watched from the veranda as he got out of the vehicle, a man in his 50s, with disheveled grey hair, thick-rimmed glasses, dressed with a typical academic's informality, carrying a worn backpack and a laptop. "Eleanor Vance," he said, smiling as he climbed the veranda steps, shielding himself from the rain. "It's been a while. I must say your invitation was the most intriguingly vague one I've ever received." She smiled, hugging him briefly. "Thank you for coming, Robert, especially with so little information." Well, when an art restorer who has always been the personification of scientific skepticism calls me talking about inexplicable phenomena, my curiosity is naturally piqued. He looked at the imposing facade of the house. "Impressive place. Historic, I imagine." "More than you can imagine," Eleanor replied, leading him inside. In the living room, Marion was waiting. Eleanor watched with interest as Robert saw her for the first time, the slight frown, the momentary confusion in his eyes. To someone who didn't know the full story, the apparent age difference between mother and daughter would be, at the very least, disconcerting. "Professor Cole, this is my mother, Marion Vance." "Your mother?" Robert hesitated for a moment, clearly confused, but quickly regained his professional composure. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Vance." "The pleasure is mine, Professor. Eleanor has spoken very highly of your work." Marion smiled, that enigmatic smile Eleanor was relearning. "And please call me Marion." "Mrs. makes me feel much older than I look, don't you think?" The tension in the air was palpable. Eleanor realized they needed to address the elephant in the room immediately, or suspicion would create a barrier difficult to overcome. "Robert," she said, gesturing for them to sit, "before we show you what brought you here, I need to tell you a story that will sound completely fanciful, impossible. I only ask that you listen to the end, with as open a mind as possible." The scientist nodded slowly, placing his laptop on the coffee table. "I'm intrigued. Go on." For the next hour, Eleanor recounted the entire story. Her mother's disappearance 30 years prior, the mysterious letter from Alistair, the tapestry, the portal, Marion's return, and Alistair's sacrifice. She spoke of time flowing differently on the other side, thus explaining her mother's youthful appearance. She described the gift she had discovered she possessed, the connection to the Order of the Broken Mirror, and the quest they were now on to find a way to reopen the portal without demanding another sacrifice. Robert listened in silence, his face a mask of neutral concentration. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't show explicit disbelief. He just listened, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. When Eleanor finally finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the rain had intensified, creating a curtain of water that isolated the house from the outside world. Finally, Robert spoke. In any other circumstance, with anyone else, I would politely thank you for the coffee, invent an excuse about an urgent university commitment, and leave here convinced I was dealing with a case of shared delusion. He adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Eleanor. But I know you. I know your rigor, your skepticism. I know you wouldn't call me here for a fantasy story without a purpose. So you believe us? Eleanor asked, a hint of hope in her voice. I didn't say that. Robert smiled slightly. I said I'm willing to consider that you genuinely believe what you're saying. And therefore there's something here worth investigating, even if the final explanation is different from the one you propose. He closed his notebook. Show me this tapestry. Eleanor exchanged a look with her mother. It wasn't exactly the reaction they had hoped for, but it was better than immediate rejection. They led Robert to the library, where the piece occupied the main wall. The scientist's reaction was interesting. He approached the tapestry slowly, his eyes scanning every detail with analytical intensity. He didn't ask for permission before raising his hand and touching it gently. Something that surprised Eleanor. Robert was known for his almost reverential respect for historical artifacts. Extraordinary, he murmured after a few moments. The composition, the colors, there's something unquestionably anomalous here, even for a layman in restoration like me. Anomalous how? Marion asked, watching him closely. I can't explain it precisely. It's like, he hesitated, searching for the words. It's like looking at something that is simultaneously here and somewhere else. There's a quality to the image that suggests depth, where there should be none. Eleanor felt a wave of relief. He was seeing it. Not everything, certainly, but enough to know there was something genuinely unusual about the tapestry. And the mirror? She asked, taking the silver object that had served as the key to the portal from a small carved wooden box. Robert took it carefully, examining first the reflective side and then the symbols engraved on the back. His demeanor shifted subtly. His posture relaxed, his eyes gained a gleam of genuine fascination. These symbols, he said, turning the small object to catch different angles of light. They look familiar, though I've certainly never seen them before. They remind me of some mathematical patterns we study in theoretical physics, visual representations of folded dimensions, of intersections between parallel realities. Marion approached, pointing to one of the symbols. This one in particular. What do you see? A spiral that folds in on itself, creating a... No, it's not quite a Mobius strip, it's more complex. Robert frowned, concentrating. It's as if it represents a point where multiple dimensions touch. In quantum terms, we might call it a multidimensional entanglement node. Eleanor and Marion exchanged significant glances. This was exactly how the Order described the points of passage between dimensions, as knots where the threads of reality intertwined in non-Euclidean ways. Would you like to run some tests? Eleanor asked, gesturing to the scientific equipment they had prepared. A digital microscope connected to a computer, a portable spectrometer for material composition analysis, a small thermal camera. Robert smiled, a genuine scientist's smile in the face of the unknown. I thought you'd never ask. The next few hours were dedicated to systematic analyses of the tapestry and the mirror. Robert worked with the methodical intensity Eleanor remembered from their joint projects, documenting every discovery, every anomaly, every unexpected pattern. Marion watched with fascination, occasionally offering insights based on her knowledge of the Order and the other side of the portal. As night fell, they returned to the living room, where Mrs. Gable had prepared a light meal. Robert's demeanor was transformed. The polite skepticism had given way to a vibrant, almost feverish curiosity. Well, he said finally, after pouring himself some wine, I can say with certainty that we are dealing with something absolutely unique. The tapestry's pigments contain elements I can't identify with my portable equipment. The fabric's weave exhibits fractal patterns that repeat on scales impossible for manual weaving. And the mirror. He shook his head in wonder. The mirror reflects light at frequencies that shouldn't be possible for ordinary silver. So you believe us now? Eleanor asked, trying not to sound overly eager. Robert considered the question for a moment. Let's say I'm willing to accept that there are phenomena here that defy conventional explanations. As for the specific story about dimensional portals and time travel, well, as a scientist, I prefer to say I'm open to the possibility, but I would need more direct evidence. Evidence like me? Marion suggested with a slight smile. A woman who should be over 60, but looks 40 because, for me, only 8 years passed, while for the rest of the world it was 30. That is intriguing, certainly. Robert placed his wineglass on the table. But there are medical explanations for a youthful appearance, and without documentary proof of your identity and real age. I have fingerprints, Marion interrupted. DNA, records that can be verified. Eleanor can confirm my identity. And there's also this, Eleanor added, taking an old photograph from a folder, the same one she had found months earlier, showing her young mother working on the tapestry, with Alistair in the background. The date on the back is 1992. This man in the background is Alistair Finch. Compare it with recent photos of him online. Robert examined the photograph and, after a few moments of hesitation, took out his phone and searched for images of Alistair. The businessman, before his mysterious withdrawal from public life, had been prominent enough for there to be ample material available. Impressive, he murmured after the comparison. The resemblance is perfect. No signs of aging despite decades of difference. He looked up at the two women. But there are still prosaic explanations. Very similar relatives. Photographic manipulation. You're determined to doubt, aren't you? Eleanor sighed, a hint of frustration in her voice. It's not a matter of determination, Eleanor. It's the scientific method. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Robert smiled gently. But I'm here, aren't I? That must count for something. Marion leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the scientists. What if we could offer a demonstration? Not the full opening of the portal. That would require specific conditions we don't have now. But something smaller. Proof that the veil between dimensions can be manipulated. Eleanor looked at her mother, surprised. Can we do that? The small mirror still retains energy from the portal, Marion explained. With the tapestry and the knowledge I gained from the other side, I can show a glimpse. A window, not a door. Robert put down his glass, suddenly alert. What kind of glimpse? A moment from the other side. A look at where Alistair is now. The silence that followed was thick with possibilities. Eleanor felt her heart race. The thought of seeing Alistair even briefly, even from a distance, stirred an emotion in her she had been trying to suppress for months. Let's do it, she decided, standing up. Now, back in the library, Marion carefully placed the small mirror in the center of the tapestry, in the same spot it had been during the portal's opening. She asked Robert and Eleanor to step back a few paces, forming a semicircle before the piece. What's about to happen, she explained, is not a full opening. It's more like tuning into a distant frequency. We will see, but we won't be able to interact. And it will be brief. The residual energy in the mirror is limited. Eleanor watched her mother with a mixture of anxiety and admiration. In the months since her return, Marion had gradually revealed the knowledge she had acquired on the other side. Techniques, rituals, understandings that transcended the conventional categories of science and mysticism. It was as if she had returned not just from another place, but from another form of consciousness. Marion closed her eyes, positioning her hands a few inches from the mirror without touching it. She began to recite words in a language Eleanor vaguely recognized, the same one she had used to open the portal, but in a different, softer cadence, like a lullaby. The air in the library seemed to thicken. The light from the lamps flickered subtly, and then slowly, the small mirror began to glow, not with the intense blue of the portal, but with a soft violet hue like the sky at the exact moment between day and night. The light expanded, forming a perfect circle about 2 feet in diameter over the tapestry, and within that circle, the tapestry's image faded, replaced by a completely different vision. It was an impossible landscape. The sky, if it could be called a sky, had an opalescent quality, with colors that flowed into one another like ink in water. Trees vaguely resembling redwoods rose to impossible heights, but their leaves seemed to be delicate crystals that refracted light in hypnotic patterns. The ground was undulating, covered in something that resembled grass, but each blade seemed to have its own consciousness, moving in coordinated patterns like a single organism. And there, amidst that alienly beautiful landscape, was a figure Eleanor recognized immediately. Alistair. He was sitting on a formation that resembled a rock, but seemed to pulse subtly with an inner light. He wore simple clothes, similar to those he had worn when Eleanor met him. But there was something different about his appearance, a luminous quality, as if he were partly made of the same ethereal substance that composed that world. And he was not alone. Beside him were other figures, humanoid but not entirely human, with limbs that were too long and skin that changed color as they moved. They seemed to be in the middle of a conversation, although no sound crossed the dimensional window Marion had opened. "Alistair," Eleanor whispered, unable to stop herself. As if he had heard something that should have been impossible through that one-way vision, Alistair abruptly raised his head. His eyes, now a blue so deep they seemed to contain galaxies, swept the environment around him, searching. Then his gaze locked directly onto the point where the dimensional window floated. Directly into Eleanor's eyes. A slow smile of recognition and astonishment formed on his face. He stood up, taking a step toward the window, one hand outstretched as if to touch the impossible. His lips moved, forming a word Eleanor couldn't hear but could clearly read, "Eleanor." At that moment, the window flickered, the violet light pulsing erratically. Marion gasped with the effort of maintaining the connection. "I can't hold it much longer." The last image Eleanor saw before the window collapsed was Alistair running toward her, his face a mask of complex emotions, joy, sadness, hope, and above all, a fierce determination. Then the violet light imploded on itself, and the small mirror fell onto the tapestry inert again. The silence in the library was absolute. Marion stepped back, exhausted, leaning against a bookshelf. Eleanor remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the spot where, seconds before, she had seen the man for whom she had developed feelings that defied time and logic. It was Robert who broke the silence, his voice trembling slightly. "That was—" He hesitated, as if his scientific vocabulary lacked adequate words. "That was real. Not a projection, not an illusion. I felt the difference in the very structure of space." Eleanor finally managed to tear her gaze from the tapestry. "He saw us, he saw me." "Yes," Marion confirmed, slowly recovering. "That shouldn't be possible. The window was supposed to be one way, but he was always exceptional, even among guardians." She smiled faintly. "And the connection between you is stronger than I imagined. Where exactly—" "What was that place?" Robert asked, his eyes wide behind his glasses, all pretense of scientific skepticism momentarily forgotten. "It's difficult to explain in three-dimensional terms," Marion replied, walking slowly to an armchair and sinking into it. "It's a plane adjacent to ours, where the rules of physics, time, and consciousness are different. The Guardians call it the interweave, because it's where the lines of reality cross. And those creatures with him? Other Guardians, beings who evolved on that plane, or who chose to migrate there from other dimensions." Marion rubbed her temples, clearly drained by the effort. "Some are ancient, very ancient. They've been there since before humanity existed." Eleanor finally managed to move, approaching the small mirror and carefully picking it up. It was cold to the touch with no trace of the violet glow. "He's alive," she said, more to herself than to the others. "He's conscious. And he recognized us. That changes everything, doesn't it?" Marion asked softly, watching her daughter with knowing eyes. Eleanor nodded slowly. "It does. Now it's not just theory, research, possibility. It's—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "It's a concrete goal. A real person we need to bring back." Robert stood up, walking to the tapestry and examining it with new eyes. "If what I saw is real, and my sensory experience tells me it is, then we are dealing with a technology or a science so advanced that, as Arthur C. Clarke said, it is indistinguishable from magic." He turned to the two women, a new resolve in his expression. "I'm in. Completely. Whatever it takes to understand this, to open that door again, or window or portal or whatever it is, I'm willing to help." Even if it challenges everything you believe as a scientist? Eleanor asked, a slight smile on her lips. Especially because it challenges everything I believe. Robert smiled back. True science is not a set of dogmas, but a methodology for exploring the unknown. And this, he gestured to the tapestry, is the unknown in its purest form. A new feeling of hope blossomed in Eleanor's chest. For the first time since Alistair's disappearance, the path forward seemed not only possible but inevitable. 3 weeks later, the library at Blackwood Manor had transformed into a curious hybrid of a scientific laboratory and a mystical sanctuary. Cutting-edge equipment, brought discreetly from the university by Robert, shared space with ancient artifacts, books from the Order, and complex diagrams that merged quantum equations with ancestral symbols. Eleanor, Marion and Robert had developed an intensive work routine. During the day, they conducted experiments, analyzed data, and tested hypotheses. At night, they reviewed ancient texts from the Order, comparing them with modern scientific theories, searching for points of convergence between seemingly disparate knowledge. Gradually, a unified theory began to emerge. What modern science called quantum entanglement, the Order had always known as threads of the mirror, connections that transcended space and time, allowing particles separated by infinite distances to behave as one. What theoretical physics postulated as compactified dimensions and parallel universes, the Order's text described as reflections of the Great Mirror, adjacent realities that occasionally touched at specific points. And most surprisingly, the scientific concept of the quantum observer, the idea that observation itself affects the observed reality, found perfect parallels in the Order's rituals, which used focused consciousness and directed intention to manipulate these dimensional intersections. "It's extraordinary," Robert commented during a late dinner, after a particularly productive day of experiments. "It's as if we're rediscovering a knowledge that once existed, but was fragmented, dispersed, encoded in different languages." "That's because that's exactly what's happening," Marion replied, pouring herself some wine. "The Order didn't invent this knowledge. They discovered it, just as you are rediscovering it now. It has always been there, woven into the very fabric of reality." "The practical question," Eleanor interjected, bringing the conversation back to their concrete goal, "is how we use this knowledge to reopen the portal without requiring a sacrifice, without needing a guardian trapped on the other side." Robert adjusted his glasses, a gesture Eleanor had learned to recognize as an indication that he was about to propose an idea that intellectually excited him. "I've been thinking about this since we started." He pulled out a notebook filled with notes and diagrams. "What if the problem isn't the need for a guardian, but the stability of the portal?" "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, leaning in to see the notes. "In the Order's text, the guardian is described as an anchor, right? Someone who keeps the portal stable, prevents it from collapsing. In quantum physics, we have an analogous concept. An observer who collapses the wave function, affixing a specific possibility among infinite ones." "Are you suggesting we replace the human guardian with some kind of mechanical observer?" Marion asked, frowning. "Not exactly mechanical, more like—" Robert hesitated, searching for the right words. "A self-sustaining system of observation and stabilization, something that combines modern quantum technology with the energetic principles the Order discovered." He quickly drew a diagram in the notebook, a circular structure with the small mirror at the center, surrounded by devices that looked like a mix of scientific sensors and ritualistic artifacts. "A stabilization ring," he explained, "using both quantum and energetic principles to keep the portal open without the need for a divided human consciousness." Eleanor studied the drawing, feeling a spark of hope. Could that work? Theoretically, yes. Robert seemed increasingly excited as he developed the idea. The challenge would be to perfectly synchronize both sides. We would need someone on the other side, probably Alistair, to build an exact counterpart of this device. "But how would we communicate that to him?" Marion asked. The window we opened was visual only and extremely brief. Eleanor was silent for a moment, an idea slowly forming. "The tapestry," she said finally. "It's not just a point of passage between dimensions. It's a means of communication." Both of them looked at her, intrigued. "When I restored the piece," she continued, "it changed. It revealed images that weren't there before. It showed Mom and me together, Alistair on the other side of the mirror. And now, after that brief window we opened, look. Eleanor stood up, walking to the tapestry. The other two followed. On the fabric, a subtle change had occurred since the opening of the dimensional window. The reflection in the mirror, which had previously shown only Alistair's indistinct face, now displayed a circular pattern around him, a pattern surprisingly similar to the stabilization ring Robert had just drawn. "He's trying to tell us something," Eleanor whispered. "He's showing that he has already started working on a similar solution on his side." "Impressive," Robert murmured, looking alternately at his drawing and the tapestry. "It's as if we're working on the same problem simultaneously, separated by dimensions but connected by some kind of entanglement," Marion completed softly. "You are entangled, you, Eleanor, and Alistair. Different minds, different realities converging on the same solution." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. "So it's possible. We can bring him back without anyone having to be trapped as a guardian." "Theoretically, yes," Robert agreed, still marveling at the synchronicity between his drawing and the image on the tapestry. "We would need specific components, some quite exotic. And we would need to synchronize the opening perfectly with his side." "The full moon," Marion said thoughtfully. "That's when the veil between dimensions naturally thins. It was during the full moon that we opened the portal before, and during the full moon that we managed to open the window to see him. The next full moon is in 17 days, Eleanor calculated quickly. "Do we have enough time to prepare everything?" Robert hesitated, clearly doing mental calculations. "It will be tight. Some of the components we need are hard to get, especially without raising questions in academic circles, but—" He smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "I have some contacts in private labs who might help, without asking too many questions." Eleanor looked at the tapestry, at the reflection that now clearly showed Alistair working on his own stabilization device. A wave of emotion washed over her, not just hope, but something more intense, more personal. Her feelings she had tried to deny, to rationalize, to explain away as mere gratitude or fascination, with the mystery he represented. But it was more than that, much more. And now, with the real possibility of bringing him back, she could no longer deny the truth. On some deep, inexplicable level, she loved Alistair Finch. She loved the man who had sacrificed 3 decades of his existence to return her mother to her. The man who, even now, from the other side of the dimensional veil, was working tirelessly to find a way back to her. "We're going to make this happen," she said, her voice firm with renewed determination. "No matter what it costs, no matter what it takes. We're bringing him back." The following 2 weeks were a blur of frantic activity. Robert mobilized contacts in advanced research labs across the country, obtaining rare components under the pretext of an unconventional quantum experiment. Marion delved into the most obscure texts of the order, searching for specific rituals for the energetic stabilization of dimensional portals, and Eleanor divided her time between helping both of them and continuing her work on the tapestry, which she now treated as a channel of communication with Alistair. Each morning, new subtle changes appeared on the fabric of the piece, as if during the night Alistair had sent coded messages through the dimensional veil, technical details of the stabilization device, instructions for synchronization, even brief personal messages that only Eleanor could decipher, hidden in seemingly decorative patterns. 3 days before the full moon, the device was nearly complete. In the library, a circular structure occupied the center of the room, a ring approximately 6 feet in diameter, composed of a complex combination of cutting-edge technology and ancient artifacts. At the center, raised on a pedestal, was the small silver mirror, now surrounded by extremely sensitive quantum sensors and specific crystals mentioned in the Order's texts. "Incredible, isn't it?" Robert commented, adjusting the final components. "If someone had told me a month ago that I'd be building an interdimensional portal combining quantum physics with ancient mystical knowledge..." Eleanor smiled, observing the final work. "Life has an interesting way of challenging our most ingrained certainties. And it's a good thing it does," Marion added, entering the library with an old manuscript. "I've found the final instructions for the activation ritual. It's more complex than we initially thought." She placed the open manuscript on a table. The yellowed pages showed intricate diagrams and text in a language that seemed a mix of archaic English and indigenous terms. According to this, the activation requires 3 points of conscious focus, 3 people, positioned at specific points around the portal, each maintaining a particular mental state during the opening. What mental states? Eleanor asked, studying the diagrams. The first is what they call the mind of the earth, stability, foundation, connection to the physical world. Marion pointed to one of the points on the diagram. The second is the mind of the sky, imagination, possibility, connection to the abstract, the conceptual. She indicated another point. And the third, the most crucial, is the heart of the bridge, love, personal bond, emotional connection with someone on the other side. Eleanor felt the blood warm in her veins. I'll be the heart of the bridge. Naturally, Marion agreed with a gentle smile. Your connection with Alistair is the strongest of the 3 of us. I can be the mind of the earth, Robert offered. My scientific training gives me a solid grounding in physical reality, in natural laws. And I will be the mind of the sky, Marion completed. My years on the other side have given me an understanding of the possibilities beyond the conventional world. Eleanor looked at the 2 of them, a wave of gratitude washing over her. I don't know how to thank you both. For believing, for helping, for everything. There's nothing to thank us for, Robert replied, adjusting his glasses with a smile. This is going to revolutionize our understanding of reality. It's the kind of discovery every scientist dreams of. And for me, Marion added, hugging her daughter, it's the chance to complete a cycle that began 30 years ago, to correct an imbalance that I unwittingly helped create. On the night of the full moon, Blackwood Manor seemed to vibrate with an expectant energy. The sky was perfectly clear, as if even the weather were conspiring for the success of the operation. The moon rose slowly on the horizon, its silvery glow intensifying with each minute. In the library, the final preparations were being completed. The stabilization device occupied the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of specific candles, created according to the order's texts. The tapestry had been moved to a position directly aligned with the device, like a kind of mirror or reflection of what they were about to create. Eleanor wore a simple white linen tunic, not out of ritual necessity, but because she felt the occasion demanded a certain solemnity. Robert wore his usual academic clothes, arguing that his familiarity with them would help him maintain the necessary mental state. Marion had opted for deep blue robes, similar to those she had worn during her years on the other side. Everything is ready, Robert announced, checking the final adjustments on the quantum sensors. The components are functioning perfectly. The synchronization with the lunar cycle is calibrated. And on the spiritual side, we are also prepared, Marion added. The symbols of protection are in place, the energies aligned. Eleanor looked out the window. The moon was now almost directly over the plantation, its intense glow creating sharp shadows in the garden below. It's time, she said simply. The 3 took their positions around the stabilization device, forming a perfect triangle. Robert to the north, representing the mind of the earth. Marion to the east, embodying the mind of the sky. And Eleanor to the south, the heart of the bridge, directly aligned with the tapestry. Marion began the ritual, reciting ancient words that reverberated in the room, with a resonance that seemed to transcend the purely acoustic. Robert activated the technological components, initiating sequences of quantum pulses programmed to create a field of stability around the emerging portal. And Eleanor closed her eyes, focusing on Alistair, not just on his image, his appearance, but on his essence, the man who had waited for decades, who had sacrificed everything to protect her mother, who was working tirelessly on the other side to find a way back. She allowed the feelings she had kept under careful control to finally flow freely, filling her completely. The small mirror at the center of the device began to glow, first with a soft violet hue, as during the opening of the dimensional window, but gradually intensifying, changing to the deep blue Eleanor remembered from the night the portal first opened. The light expanded, forming a perfect disk that pulsed in sync with the heartbeats of the 3 participants. The surrounding air thickened, became charged with static electricity. The candle flames stretched toward the center, as if drawn by an impossible gravitational force. And then, at the center of the disk of light, a distortion began to form. It was no longer just light, but a literal opening in the fabric of reality, a tunnel that extended beyond three-dimensional comprehension, revealing glimpses of the alien landscape Eleanor had seen weeks before. "It's working," Robert murmured, his voice tense with the effort of maintaining the necessary concentration. "The portal is stabilizing." "Maintain focus," Marion instructed, her own voice distant, almost ethereal. "We are at the critical moment." Eleanor barely heard them. Her attention was completely absorbed by the tunnel forming before her. Because there in the distance a figure was beginning to materialize. A male silhouette, walking with determination through the impossible dimensional passage. Alistair. He advanced quickly, each step making him more solid, more real. He wore simple clothes, similar to those he had worn during the days they spent together at the plantation. His face was a mask of intense concentration, his eyes fixed on Eleanor as if she were a beacon guiding him through the darkness. Behind him, Eleanor could glimpse other figures, the elongated, not entirely human beings she had seen during the opening of the dimensional window. They did not try to follow Alistair, but watched his departure with what seemed to be a mix of respect and sadness, like those bidding farewell to a long-time companion. As Alistair approached the exit of the tunnel, the stabilization device began to emit high-pitched alarming sounds. Small electrical discharges crackled around the ring, and the blue light pulsed ever more erratically. "What's happening?" Eleanor asked, struggling to keep her focus on Alistair. "The system is overloading," Robert replied, his hands moving frantically over the controls. "The energy required to complete the passage is greater than we calculated. We need to stabilize it for a few more seconds," Marion said, her voice tense. "He's almost through." Eleanor intensified her focus, allowing every fragment of emotion she felt for Alistair to flow freely. The love she had barely acknowledged, the connection that transcended time and space, the fierce determination to bring him back. All of this she channeled into the portal, into the man who was fighting to cross it. "Alistair," she cried, extending her hand toward the portal, though she knew she shouldn't touch it before he had fully crossed. He heard her. His eyes met hers through the dimensional distortion, and a smile lit up his face. With one last supreme effort, he lunged forward, just as the device emitted a shrill alarm and began to throw sparks in all directions. There was a blinding flash of blue light, a sound like glass shattering on a cosmic scale, and a pressure wave that knocked books from the shelves and extinguished all the candles simultaneously. For a terrifying moment, Eleanor thought they had failed, that the portal had collapsed before Alistair could fully cross. Then, as the light subsided and her eyes readjusted, she saw him. Alistair was on his knees in the center of the now inert stabilization device, breathless, trembling, but undeniably there. "Real solid back. You did it," Eleanor whispered, rushing to him, kneeling by his side, touching his face with trembling hands to assure herself he was real. "You came back." He raised his face, his eyes meeting hers. They were different now, still gray but with bluish flecks that seemed to hold echoes of the world he had come from. His skin had a subtle luminous quality, as if an inner light occasionally shone through it. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "You found a way. You really found a way." "We found it," she corrected, tears streaming freely down her face. "All of us together." Marion approached slowly, a gentle smile on her lips. "Welcome back, old friend." Alistair looked at her, a deep recognition in his eyes. "Marion, you're well. You're really well." He turned to Robert, who was observing the scene with a mix of scientific awe and human emotion. "And you must be the scientist. Thank you for believing in the impossible." "The impossible has just become possible," Robert replied, still marveling. "This changes everything." Eleanor helped Alistair to his feet. He was weak, shaky, like someone who had completed an exhausting marathon. But his eyes never left hers, as if he feared that if he looked away she might disappear. "How much time has passed?" he asked. "For you since I left?" 6 months, Eleanor answered softly. "And for you?" An enigmatic smile touched his lips. "Time is different there." It was moments and eternities simultaneously. He touched her face with gentle fingers. "But not for a second did I stop looking for a way back to you." "And the device on your side?" Robert asked, ever the curious scientist. "Did it work like ours?" A yes and no. The technology was different, more organic, more integrated with the very fabric of that reality. But the principles were the same. Alistair looked at the now inert stabilization device. The synchronization was perfect. And the portal has closed for good, Marion completed, looking at the small silver mirror now tarnished and opaque, as if all its energy had been consumed. The stabilization ring worked, but it cannot be used again. A contemplative silence fell over the group. For Robert, this meant the end of an extraordinary scientific adventure. For Marion, it represented the final closure of a 3-decade chapter of her life. For Alistair, it was the completion of a mission that had defined his existence for longer than any human should have to endure. And for Eleanor it was just the beginning. "I think you two need a moment alone," Marion said perceptively, gesturing to Robert. "Let's give them some space." When the library door closed behind them, Eleanor and Alistair were finally alone, enveloped in the silence of the night and the silvery moonlight streaming through the high windows. "You've changed," Eleanor observed, studying his face, the same features she had known, but now with an almost luminous, ethereal quality. "I spent a long time on the other side. It leaves its mark." Alistair smiled faintly. "You've changed too. There's a strength in you that wasn't there before. The knowledge. I had to find them to bring you back." Eleanor hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "To bring back the man I love." Alistair's eyes shone with an intensity that seemed to contain galaxies. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear those words. Across dimensions, across ages." "Why me?" Eleanor asked, the question that had pulsed in her mind since the first day. "Of all the people in the world, why did you choose me? Why did you wait for me?" Alistair walked to the window, watching the full moon now beginning its descent in the night sky. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality, older, wiser, as if he momentarily dropped a veil he normally kept over his true nature. "Because our destinies are intertwined, Eleanor. Not just in this life, but in many. I saw you through the threads of time long before you were born. I saw the woman who could reunify what was broken, who could restore not just works of art, but the very fabric of reality." He turned to her, his eyes glowing with that impossible inner light. "And because in each of those lives, in each of those reflections of reality, I found myself loving you. As a guardian, as a man, as a soul." Eleanor felt warm tears run down her cheeks. She moved toward him, touching his face with gentle hands. "And now?" "What happens now?" "Now," Alistair replied, covering her hands with his, "we live. We simply live, as ordinary people, but carrying the knowledge of the extraordinary." He smiled, a smile full of possibilities. "We build a life together. We learn from each other. I'll teach you the secrets I learned on the other side. You'll teach me how to be human again." "Sounds like a good plan," Eleanor murmured, drawing even closer. When their lips finally met, it was as if a circuit had been completed. A current of warmth ran through Eleanor's body, and for a fleeting moment, a moment of pure transcendence, she saw beyond the veil. She saw the infinite reflections of reality, the countless paths they could have taken, the innumerable lives in which they had met and lost each other. And she saw that in each one, this moment was predestined, this moment of reunion, of restoration, of love that transcended time itself. The kiss ended, but the connection remained, an entanglement that no closed portal, no separate dimension, no physical or metaphysical law could ever break. "Welcome back," Eleanor whispered against his lips. "Welcome home." On the library wall, the tapestry had changed one last time. It now showed 3 figures in perfect harmony, 2 women and a man, holding hands before a mirror that no longer reflected faces or distant landscapes, but only pure light, the light of infinite possibilities, of futures to be built, of stories yet to be told. And so, under the waning light of the full moon, on a historic plantation in the heart of the American South, a story that had begun with loss and mystery ended with reunion and promise. A story of restoration, not just of fabric and paint, not just of separated families, but of the very essence of love across time, across dimensions, across the infinite reflections of the great mirror of existence. A new cycle was beginning. A new tapestry would be woven thread by thread, day by day. And this time, each stitch would be placed not by fate or necessity, but by the conscious choice of three souls who had faced the impossible and emerged transformed, unified, complete. As Alistair himself had said, in his wisdom gained beyond the veil. Some restorations go far beyond fabric and paint. They reach the very heart of time, the very fabric of existence. And for Eleanor Vance,